Sword Art Online rings a different tune depending upon each person, but there is little doubt that it has been one of the most influential web novels, light novels and anime that has come out in the past 20 years. It definitely helped to launch the increasing adaptation of stories centered around video games, and made other authors rich as well. Rich enough to do tax evasion, but not rich enough to get away with it. Sword Art Online also most likely had at least indirect effect on greenlighting so many isekai light novel anime adaptations. While I was wrong in my earlier video to call it an isekai, and you could make an argument that Sword Art Online is closer to sci-fi than fantasy. But now I've seen the error of my ways, and echo the author Reki Kawahara that Sword Art Online is not really an isekai. I mean, the clue was in it all along. There isn't any slavery in it. Sword Art Online also certainly launched several YouTubers' career, where it was the most agreed upon dead horse that anyone could make a video and call it terrible. This is not really a video about that though, or even if Sword Art Online is an actual masterpiece, and spoilers, it's not. It is about how the writing of Reki Kawahara has improved ever since he published the first light novel volume of Sword Art Online, all the way back in 2009. Going back almost 15 years, I felt that Sword Art Online would be a good metric which we can judge that. You might have also heard the phrase light novel and began to wonder why the light novels and not the web novels. They are even more ancient, because first of all, 15 years is plenty enough. We don't need to go back 20 years and trade the same stories again. Second of all, Reki Kawahara deleted the web novels after getting Sword Art Online published as a light novel, and I respect his wishes. You won't hear me mention the web novels except for one infamous example. This is also my first time properly reading any light novel, so I'm hoping to see if there is something I would like to dig deeper. It could also be a companion piece to my earlier video about Sword Art Online, but don't watch that video, because I do regurgitate a lot of same opinions and it got content ID'd by Kadokawa. Lesson learned there, so there aren't going to be any anime clips unless necessary, because I don't want Kadokawa to Kemeno Friends my channel. This video will be spoiler heavy, and I will be throwing spoilers willy-nilly up to and including Alicization, but I will give proper warning where we move to one instance that anime has not yet covered. So let's jump right in and take a deep dive on Reki Kawahara as an artist and as a man, where he comes from and where he draws his inspiration, what stories he creates using his nerf gear. I don't promise any singing. Right off the bat, I have to mention this observation I had almost immediately I began reading. Light novels are really light read. Go figure. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I was just going through pages faster than I usually do while reading books. I was expecting simple, easy to digest prose, but geez, this leaves Brandon Sanderson to dust. I could knock out one volume in an hour, or how long it took my dishwasher to complete his 1 hour plus cycle, and be rather comfortable that I got everything that the story had to offer. For comparison, I'm currently fixing a gap in my classic books, and my current bedtime read is Don Quixote. This is not me being pretentious or saying that Sword Art Online is trash, but just an observation that my two brain cells didn't need to do much while reading the early volumes. What I do have an issue with, especially in the early volumes, is that Kawahara repeats a lot of in his writing. You get told the same action and story pieces at least twice. Most notable one for me were the repeated mentions how nerf gear is a revolutionary piece of tech. Volume 1 suffers the most from this, but volumes 3 and 4 also suffer from this. Oh, by the way, I skipped some volumes since they're just collection of short stories set in Aincrad and fairy dance arcs. If I missed something absolutely crucial because of this, then please do tell me in the comments. But bear in mind that I did watch the first season of Sword Art Online anime and I'm familiar with the short stories. One of them still being my favorite moment in entirety of Sword Art Online. The fight scenes deserve praise though, and they're constantly well written for the entire light novel. Yeah, sometimes characters explaining skills and magic spells can get in the way of the flow, but that's a nitpick, and I have to make the concession that this is the nature of trying to explain game mechanics in writing, except once, but that has to wait till the spoiler section. I mentioned the short stories, and I feel that the first volume really suffers from not having those short stories baked in. The narrative moves from Kirito's fight against the lizard man in 72nd floor to Kirito's flashback chapter for the first day in Aincrad, and then jumps back to Kirito in 72nd floor. This might be a remnant of the web novel, and Kawahara might have not been as comfortable in his writing as he was years later. To support my point, if you read the second volumes afterward by the author, he actually apologizes for his faults and only choosing on Kirito's POV. This was quite enlightening for me, and while it's true that fantasy books tend to have multiple POVs, but one good example is The Witcher, and the early books of The Witcher do remind me a bit of the second volume's narrative framing. Geralt or Kirito meet new people and solve their problems or make things worse for everyone involved. The entire afterword also paints a nice picture of Reki Kawahara's character. He is clearly just doing what he loves, and he most likely knows his shortcomings better than anyone. Still, I'm being too harsh. Kirito's and Asuna's trek in fantasy England and their relationship is the beating heart of the story. Not just for Aincrad, for other arcs as well. Kirito just tends to be a rather one-dimensional character most of the books. Kirito is not Zero from Fate's Stay Night, who has a lot of his character neutered because of an anime adaptation. Kirito is better in the light novels, yes, but not by much. To explain briefly and move on, I'm rather indifferent towards Kirito and find events and characters that happen to him and around him way more fascinating. Your mileage may vary, but reading the novels didn't really make the case for Kirito for myself. I also do have issues with how the story treats Asuna at points, but I will save them for later, when I leave the cat on top of the table. But this might be a good time to talk about sex scenes, or lack of them. Now, I didn't watch any old YouTube videos about Sword Art Online, because I wanted to be influenced as little as possible. But I do distinctly remember minor tongue-in-cheek comments made by others that Kirito and Asuna didn't have a sex scene, or even an implied one. This is actually an ongoing discussion in fantasy books in general. You've got one side that completely hates them, and the other extreme that loves them. I personally can go either way, and there isn't really wrong answer here. Quality notwithstanding, of course. I can read books by Brandon Sanderson and Fonda Lee and like both approaches to sex in fantasy stories. I'm also glad that Kawahara didn't add them to the light novel because oh boy, this now non-canon web novel extra chapter is too big of a load to swallow. Her anus is defenseless. This was the only web novel mention for this video. I'm so sorry. I should also mention that while Kirito spawned countless self-insert lookalikes, Sword Art Online is very lacking in the harem department, and as in, it's not a harem at all. Other characters do have a crush on Kirito, but once everything is cleared up, we return to one true pairing, Kirito x Asuna, as God intended. I should also mention something about the fairy dance arc. The writing quality doesn't change much, so I'll just list some pointers. Let's start with a hot take. Fairy Dance was better than I expected, but it wasn't good either. Kawahara really is in touch with his gamer's side, because he is weirdly prophetic at parts, and not just in this arc. He points out how you can't really call these virtual reality games MMORPGs, since they're much more immersive, a point which a lot of metaverse evangelists would make decades later. Another narrative decision that also felt the same way was the ending of the arc. Bad interactions in MMOs have spilled into the real world in even more horrific scenarios, so having two nerds duking it out away from the keyboard feels a fitting end to the arc. I can't wait for the later arcs having a villain who runs a crypto Ponzi scheme, and the method to beat him is screenshotting his assets. I also liked how Kirito mentions that he uses gaming as escapism from his parents' horrific accident. I'm sure anyone can understand where he's coming from, and I think Kawahara is writing from the heart when he makes up that character trait for Kirito. Speaking of Kirito, I also liked when he turned to a goddamn monster and just massacred those guys. Why doesn't anyone talk about that? Shit was hardcore. I also liked half of Sukuha's character. Part of her character is the fact that she started to game in virtual reality to cope with the loss of Kirito. She wanted to see what her brother saw in them, and she wondered if she could have been a bit closer to his brother before the events of Aincrad happened. And this is genuinely a great character trait for Sukuha. What I don't like is the other half of her character, and you already know what it is. She is really infatuated by Kirito, and this really picks up to full-blown incest fantasies when she learns that Kirito is actually just her cousin and not a brother, which is just bleh. I leave the most egregious part of Sukuha's character and other parts of this arc for later, but they're just as bad as you've been told. Moving to Phantom Bullet, and this was the point where I was really covering new ground. Of course, I've heard stuff through cultural osmosis, but major plot points and key moments were still unknown for me. At the start of Volume 5, I was pleasantly surprised. The writing quality went up, and I only needed to read the talk with Kirito and the government agent Kikuoka, or maybe it's just because they talk about food during their serious banter about another VR killer. I'm a sucker for that. Even if that quality takes a dip when the main hub in Gun-Gale Online is called Glocken, really? There are a lot of facts about guns as well, and I can't really comment on that. If you're a gun nut, then Phantom Bullet is either an enjoyable read or frustrating read depending how accurate these gun facts are. Surprisingly, I didn't take that many notes when I read volumes 5 and 6. It's more of the same as earlier volumes, but the quality of the writing has improved. Kirito turns into a bisexual icon, and a completely new female character is introduced, Sino. I don't want to spoil Sino's story, but I did find her backstory and character surprisingly engaging. Even if the ass shots in the anime, there is that cultural osmosis, and how in the end she had to be saved by Kirito in an event that really stretched my suspension of disbelief. I also want to point out that early in the volume 5 we get a POV chapter from a character that seems to be our killer, and I'm going to say it that I fucking called it when it happened. I said to myself, oh, the killer is Sino's only male friend, and he wants to kill Sino's competition to make her the top gun in Gun-Gale Online. This edgy speech at the start of the volume makes so much sense now. It's made by an edgy teenage boy. I was right about the killer part, but the motives and methods were completely wrong. I guess I'm the clown now. Thankfully, I have a home in Alfheim Online. I also throw my headcanon out there. I was suspicious when our resident sniper was called Sino, and back in my mind I thought, did Kawahara name her Sino, because that is rather close to name of the Finnish sniper Simo Häyhä. My only proof that it's true is the afterword at the end of volume 5, where Kawahara name drops Simo Häyhä, and that is enough for me to go full speed ahead with my headcanon. I refuse to fact check this. Just let me have this, please. I have very little else to say about Phantom Bullet, so let me just speed ahead and talk about volume 7 a bit. Volume 7 is called Mother's Rosary, and oh man, what a pleasant surprise. Mother's Rosary does not have my favorite moment, it's not the best written, since Alicization is right after, and that has a big jump in quality. And it's not even my favorite volume in what I cover in this video. But if I had to recommend you to read one volume, and one volume only, it'd be this. Or watch the anime season 2 episodes 18 to 24, either works. To sum up Mother's Rosary, I'd say it is to Asuna's character what Moonlit Black Cats were to Kirito. Important moment for Asuna, even if she's an actual monster for using that kind of resolution on a monitor. Absolutely filthy. I was ready to groan when a certain medical condition was made the focus in this volume, but to me, it never felt disrespecting. What made it at least seem somewhat respectable was that Kawahara consulted his friend who works in the medical field. I have some issues, like how even when Kirito is not the POV character, he managed to be the least interesting part of it. And Asuna spends a way too long describing how this Undyne is pulled to be a healer. That was a weird thing to fixate on Asuna's part. In many ways, Mother's Rosary is what I wanted the Moonlit Blackguards arc to be. The big reveal happens halfway in the volume, and the rest of it is built upon how Asuna and Yuki deal with it. If you are at least somewhat familiar with the first season of Sword Art Online, then you owe yourself to check out Mother's Rosary. Moving on to Alicization, the first epic saga that we get from Reki Kawahara, and I don't use the word epic lightly here, because if Aincrad, Alfheim, Phantom Bullet, Mother's Rosary plus side stories were all in 8 volumes, and in contrast, Alicization will be the focus for the next 10 volumes, plus 2 if you include the Moon Cradle. I alluded earlier that Alicization has a jump in writing quality in the series, and I still believe that. At this point, I feel that Kawahara has found his style of writing and feels comfortable with it. This simple prose, passion for video games, and blunt way of writing really works for series like Sword Art Online. While Kawahara predicts the future once again with AI and drops a couple of absolute-based statements, the story is toying with the idea of what is real, and can AI really be human are great questions that I feel Kawahara can and should tackle. Still, I'm not expecting statements or observations like Captain Vime's observation of socioeconomic unfairness using boots, or
"You need to believe in things that aren't true. How else can they become?"
I should not downplay Kawahara though, and the way he has Kirito mention how laws are not always just and terrible people can be innocent in the eyes of the law but not morally. A good observation to make, and definitely something good to hear from Kirito. Surprisingly, I have very little to say about volumes 9 and 10, except this couple of moments that if I don't mention, then I will regret it. When Kirito wakes up in the underworld and has a flashback of 3 children running in a field, the light novel flows absolutely perfectly to this wide shot of Alice, Yuchio, and Kirito as children. I checked the anime opening, and rightfully they use this exact scenario in the opening, but I think they missed a bit, and it doesn't flow as well as in the light novel. Second moment for me was actually the afterword for volume 9, where Kawahara mentions that his work is getting an anime adaptation and he feels overjoyed by it. This somehow made me feel nostalgic, even though I never really engaged with Sword Art Online when it was fresh. Somehow, Sword Art Online has had a small part in me, even though I've never really actually experienced it outside of other people's words. So I will just jump right into volume 11 and talk about why I even made this video. If you've seen the anime or read the volume, then you know what's coming. I've been deliberately hiding this, and I don't think I can anymore. Let's talk about how Sword Art Online treats women, and most importantly, how Reki Kawahara feels about this writing years later. The next section will have mentions of sexual assault and self-harm, so be warned. Back in 2018, Reki Kawahara publicly apologized to the voice actors Kaori Ishihara and Reina Kondo, who played Tease and Ronue. Couple of weeks ago I just remembered this moment, and this was the catalyst why I wanted to cover Sword Art Online and Reki Kawahara. If you do not know, Volume 11 involves a plot point where Tease and Ronue are the victims of attempted sexual assault by nobles who abuse the law and try provoking a reaction from Eugeo, so they can punish him severely. While it can be argued that it's a good character moment for Eugeo, it's not so much for Tease and Ronue, who are nothing but objects in this story. Women in Sword Art Online, more often than not, get the short end of the stick, and even a character like Asuna has multiple scenarios where she is nothing more than a damsel or an object to be ogled at. These include moments like in the first volume, whenever a male character meets Asuna for the first time, their eyes bulge, their tongue touches the floor, and they howl for a paragraph how beautiful Asuna is. I also want you to remember that Asuna is one of the better ones, which might make you question other female characters when Alfheim has Asuna be a literal damsel in distress, and the narrative even implies a sexual assault attempt. There are even moments where I had to stop reading and check the anime because I was in disbelief in what I read. In Volume 1, Asuna makes a mention how she will kill herself if something happens to Kirito. This wasn't a one-off thing, and Kirito mentions to Heathcliff that if he dies, Heathcliff should look after Asuna so she doesn't kill herself. I was certain that this was not in the anime, but when I checked, and yeah, there it is. Real classy. We could spend some time on how Sukuha, Shino, Keiko and Rika get sidelined right after their arc ends, but I should also mention that this also happens to Klein and Agil, but at least they are not dreaming how great of a man Kirito is. There are other moments that are out of Kawahara's control, like how Season 2 likes to make sure you get a good look at Shino's ass. For some reason, Kawahara is also rather apologetic about introducing Shino in Phantom Ballet. This is something I should also mention. Sukuha also has a terrible arc where the only thing she keeps thinking about is Kirito and how it's okay to love him because they're just cousins. Thankfully, Reki Kawahara realizes this himself and has taken strides to try and have more agency with how he writes female characters. Even if you don't see anything wrong with examples I've brought up, surely you would still agree that female characters having more agency than just being objects to be saved at the end of the story would make for a better characters and stories. I should also mention this, that you can explore charged topics, but it requires certain amount of finesse and perspective. One day I will talk about Sensitive Boy, and that deals with sexual assault and it's way more explicit than Sword Art Online ever is. Can't say when, since I'm still digesting it, but I hope you don't get the impression that I'm 100% against depicting heinous acts in media. That's not what I'm about. Kawahara made it clear in 2019 that he tries to do better, and honestly that is more than you could ask for anyone. Realizing the problems you have with your writing and trying to correct them is an admirable trait. I also feel that this has come from real self-reflection on Kawahara's part, so that adds more sincerity to his comments. If you've been burned out by how female characters have been treated in Sword Art Online, especially in the anime adaptation, then what you should take away from this video is that Kawahara understands this and tries to be better. This might not be enough for you, but maybe one day Kawahara releases a story that you love which has nuance and great character writing, then know that he went through this journey of self-reflection to improve himself. So when I realized this, I decided to do something that I don't suggest that you emulate. I decided to skip to volume 21, which is the first book for Unital Ring, the second epic saga right after the end of Alicization. Spoiler warning, obviously, and I do try to speak in broad strokes as not to give anything away. Okay, as a treat, have one out of context spoiler. I made a conscious choice that I would spoil myself. That's not funny when you read that loud. I made a conscious choice that I would spoiler myself, and once again, I do not suggest that you do the same. Okay, maybe starting from volume 21 ain't so bad idea after all. The real reason was because this book came out in 2018, which would mean that Kawahara should have matured as a writer, and I feel that is more than fair to try and judge based on his more recent works. So how does volume 21 stack up? In many ways it's more of the same, but in couple of very noticeable ways it has improved. More of the same in the sense that the prose remains very basic, and this is my personal opinion, the overtly explained game mechanics are boring. The theme this time is that Kirito and friends get trapped in survival game a la Rust. Base building, crafting, raiding, hunger and dehydration, they're all here. It's just a shame then that Kawahara relies on displaying full status bars for items instead of finding clever ways to describe, for instance, an item durability. I get that this is what he loves to write, but some food for thought. The whole volume is also more comedic than previous ones, and it did a couple of good chuckles out of me. Even if the first big gag was Kirito accidentally grappling two female characters' belt and struggling to not to pull their pants down. You might be excused to think that the female characters' writing stays the same, but no. Other female characters that have been in the sidelines get to have their moments, and they manage to go through with it without thinking about Kirito. The game also has an interesting twist to the formula that might not seem that bad at first, but then you remember the consequences on how that twist would apply to certain characters, and it gets interesting. I should also mention that the artist Apeshi, who has been illustrating all these volumes, and his art looks really great here. And I'm not saying that because buff woman could. In the earlier volumes, characters had these weird faces, and this is not an issue anymore in the later novels. Still, I can't in good conscience recommend that you skip everything and start from Unital Ring. The ending of Alicization will be spoiled for you, and it's not like there's gold at the end of here. Volume 21 was very enjoyable read, and I'd say it was my favorite volume or tied with volume 7. In the future I might prefer volume 7 more, but for now I'd say Unital Ring was a good read and a step in the right direction for the series. I'm also heavily biased, because I loved playing Rust with the boys, and definitely got the same feeling while reading Unital Ring. So what to make of all this? I feel that I've learned a lot more about Reki Kawahara than Sword Art Online. You can clearly tell what he likes, and it's not like he's a bad writer. And he has been improving from almost always from one volume to the next. I didn't even mention stuff like how he used to write 6 light novels a year, which would explain quite a lot. I found myself enjoying reading Sword Art Online quite a lot of times, and it definitely wasn't a waste of time. Your mileage may vary, and if you have the pre-existing negative notions about Sword Art Online, and especially Kirito, then maybe you could give the light novels a shot. Maybe as a general advice, try and pick up reading through them and move on to fantasy books after that. But even with all that said, I think I will just keep watching the anime adaptation instead of reading Alicization. There is a good chance I might continue reading Unital Ring, but I feel that the anime adds quite a lot. It is a power fantasy, it's simple, and at points, it's insulting at times. But I would never question why it got so popular. You could say it was a dumb luck, but there is heart to the story that Kawahara can bring out with his writing. Maybe he can one day write that Yuri story he always dreamed about making. Perhaps my initial skepticism for the series was born because Sword Art Online got way too popular, and with popularity comes new fans and detractors that rarely meet each other with respect and understanding. This tends to happen with anime that introduce an entire new generation to the genre, and established anime fans resent that. I've been trying to better myself and not rain on anyone's parade if they enjoy My Hero Academia or Demon Slayer, for instance. Myself and many others grew up watching cringe fest that was Naruto, and the only reason anyone doesn't clown on it because we matured and set the unspoken rules for discussion around anime on the internet. This could be a video all by itself. Thank you for watching this incoherent mess. You can find short online light novels almost everywhere, and a good place to start might be your local library and see if they have any, if you are not willing to spend any money to get your own copy. The anime is on Crunchyroll, Hulu and Netflix, depending where you live. I found reading light novels quite an enjoyable time. Let me know if you'd like to see more videos about light novels and comment if you have a favorite one. I don't know what I will make a video about next, but I was thinking about the French, so we might take a look at a certain animated series. Like and subscribe, leave a comment and have a good time.